Cool. All right, everybody, why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome. It's May 9th. It's 1:01 p.m. This is Assembly Rules Committee. We'll go ahead and start with introductions. Mr. President.
Mr. Presverdia.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley.
And Christopher Constant. On the phone, we have Ms. Salatel.
Yes.
Mr. Myers.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez.
Present. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Here.
And Mr. Salt.
Here.
All right, thank you. So we will go ahead and dive right in with service awards. We've been trying to do this for a while, Mr. President. Congratulations, 5 years of service to the municipality. It's on the record. Next, I don't really have a report for today other than a lot going on still, election happening, things are changing on our process with new members, new committees, and fewer committees. Hopefully, we'll have that discussion. And otherwise, I'm not going to riff. I'm going to pivot off to legislative team.
Hello, everyone. I'll be quick with our updates. Allie is doing a lot of work with the Home Initiative communications and helping prepare presentations for meetings with community councils. Jennifer is really busy with the Anchorage Child Care and Early Education Fund implementation, and you'll be getting an update on that this Friday. And then Jennifer and I have been working on the alcohol tax strategic plan. You'll have an update on that on Friday as well. A new thing we introduced in the branch is the Assembly Council Legislative Services and Clerks are meeting every other week to look at all the projects you've given us and sort them out and check where we're at. It's been kind of overwhelming the last 6 months with all the work that's been going on. So we're trying to get better organized on our end to support you all better. We're doing another City Nerd Night on May 30th, and the focus is on transportation. It will be at Aquila Space, which is a nonprofit on Fifth Avenue by the mall. Because it will be right after the opening of the new protected bike lane. So it'll be super nerdy transportation people at that event. It should be really good. And then one other thing, we completed a branch salary survey in the fall where we looked at all the salaries of the staff in the branch to make sure that we're competitive with other workplaces. And so we'll be sharing that with you at the June rules meeting and some more information on that. Then that's all I have to report. And then one other thing I wanted to bring to your attention. Yesterday, I emailed you the progress report on your work plan. And so I think we'll do more of a deep dive at on the June meeting because I wasn't prepared for it today. But I did fill out some updates and actions that I knew about. And so I'm hoping you can all look at this and fill in anything I'm missing. And then there are, as I mentioned, Kevin Cross signed up for some things. So before I take his name off, I wanted you all to look at it and see if anyone wanted to jump in for him on his projects. And then there are a few projects that don't have a lead on them. So either one of you needs to jump in on those, or we should consider taking them off the list if it's no one's priority. So if you could just look that over in the next week or so and get back to me, I'll have an updated report for you and we'll do a deeper dive at the June meeting. And that is all I have. Thank you.
And the clerk.
Well, Mr. Chair kind of already said it. Elections and budgets. Yeah, and we're recruiting for another executive assistant in the office. So that is out recruiting right now.
All right, it's going to be light on briefing and more into the meat today. Then next on the agenda, I have a discussion about the committee plan. It's the blue page that's in your packet. So I already have a slight change to it. It's overwhelming. Claire tries to keep me on track and life happens. And so then it's time to present, and I haven't gotten my work done. So there's one slight change to this that I'll be proposing. This is an overview of the conversation we've been having about our committees. The mission has been to come up with a way to make sure every department is represented at a committee. So the department heads have a place to go to work with the assembly on smaller group projects and other priorities. So the goals listed are to ensure streamlined structure so that every committee is effective and relevant to the work of the assembly, keep the committee process manageable in relationship to our resources and capacity, and to provide each department with a pathway to work and communicate with the assembly directly. So the real trick in this is that second goal, keeping the committee process manageable in relationship to our resources and capacity. In a perfect world, we have all the committees we want and all the staff we want and all the time we want, and you can talk ad nauseum about everything. Well, what I mean, somebody said that doesn't sound perfect. And in a perfect world, that is for those of us who want to talk about something, you want a place to do it. That's the perfect part of it. But the reality is we are time constrained, money constrained, staff constrained. And that is for our staff, and that is for members as well. And so there have been a couple of commissions and committees that have been created with the best of intentions and yet have had no real assembly participation, no meaningful assembly participation, which raises the question about, are those structures warranted to continue? And if so, those who are going to be the advocates for continuation should be the ones willing to step up and operate them, because there are staff getting kind of cornered into doing a ton of work for committees that don't have membership really participating, but public is there, and it's becoming a net drain on everybody's time. And so some retooling. So that's kind of a sidebar, but changes that we're making specifically, and this conversation has been ongoing. The Health Policy and the Public Safety Committee will be combining to be the Public Health and Safety Committee. So the reality behind that is it will continue to meet once a month for 2 hours, but we're going to challenge leadership to consider a method to ensure that the departments continue to have a rotating opportunity to present, but that their standing reports become less of what's the purpose of the meeting, and it becomes more the dialogue on what's important, because some of these processes have become pretty rote, where a report is delivered that could be in an email, and that's not the best use. And so the consolidation is happening, and I don't have the list of folks who are seated on these committees. I guess that's the next step. Great, thank you. And so then the Ethics and Elections Committee will be merged into a committee called Quality Municipal Services Committee. This committee will review elections in March, August, October, and the October could roll into December because that's when we have our Title 28 updates, the annual review of our elections code after the elections. And then ethics updates once or twice a year with a meeting with the Chief Ethics Officer of the Muni or members of the Ethics Board if they have time. And we'll be adding human resources, purchasing, IT, risk management, safety, and GIS into this conversation. Finance might be at the table to participate from time to time because pretty much everything in all of those departments has a budget line and we have to fund. And this could also include work on the Muni Trust and the online checkbook. So it's a lot. It's a lot. So we're consolidating, but at the same time, we're increasing some of the workload. Enterprise and Utilities will now become Infrastructure, Enterprise, and Utilities Oversight Committee, which will add Public Works. Oh, good. So it's Public Works is in two places. It's listed up in the Transportation, which I conveniently omitted going over. I'll go back to that in a minute. But Maintenance, Public Works probably also will be under the Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee, the Infrastructure, Enterprise, Utility Oversight Committee. The way I look at that one is heavy equipment, big trucks, that's where it goes. So other than the fire department, I skipped transportation. Transportation will go from quarterly to monthly with adding public transit, engineering, traffic engineering, transportation planning, AMATs, project management, and engineering to that conversation. And then the Budget and Finance Committee and Municipal Audit Committee will merge to become the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee. And then at a later date, as capacity allows, we're going to look at creating the partner to the Quality Municipal Services Committee, which was the Quality of Life Committee to address Parks and Rec, Library, Equal Rights Commission, Education, Office of Equity and Justice, and Office of Equal Opportunity. What's going to stay the same at this time? Housing and Homelessness, CEDC, rules, AMATs, and legislative. The Equity Committee is an interesting one that I am going to challenge members to contemplate its continued existence, not because we've solved the equity problem, but because it's a committee without really assembly guidance. And if members aren't going to be able to participate regularly, then we need to be able to make our staff available for other work. But again, we'll come to that conversation a little bit down the road. So this is the overall review. Please.
Okay, so as far as who is on what, if we stick with what we have, we are going to have only 3 committees that are not committees of the whole. So that might be a discussion you guys want to have. Right now, health policy is Daniel, Karen, Anna, George, and Felix. And then the public safety committee is a committee of the whole. So if you combine them and leave it as a committee of the whole, then that's one of the committee of the wholes. The transportation committee is currently a committee of the whole. The ethics and elections right now is Christopher, Karen, Scott, and Zach. And then enterprise and utilities oversight is a committee of the whole. The budget and finance committee is a committee of the whole. And then the audit committee is Felix, Scott, and then Kent, Mike Cipriano, and Alden. And then Kevin was also on the finance committee. Housing and homelessness is Felix, Randy, Anna, Christopher, George, and Karen. This rules committee is a committee of the whole. CEDC is George, Anna, Karen, Christopher, Zach, Mark, Scott, Randy, and Daniel. The AMATs is just a liaison, and that's Daniel, and Meg is the alternate. The equity liaisons are Felix and Cameron. And then the legislative members are Anna, Christopher, Zach, George, and Scott.
Okay, so still a work in progress. I have a couple questions, Meg.
Thanks. So AMAT, just note, those are policy committee members. We have to go to those meetings in order to make queue, and then we still need an alternate for that one. If people could turn off their microphones, that'd be great, because I'm hearing the echo. As for changing transportation to monthly, if that's the case, then I don't know that it should necessarily be the 2 policy committee members from AMAT. I just don't have capacity to co-chair another monthly committee. And then I would like, if the chair is amenable to changing Enterprise and Utilities Committee to, or the new name, to co-chairs instead of a chair and vice chair, please. Thank you.
So we'll finalize the conversation on transportation when Daniel's back, but it's a fair comment about the time. So AMAT's 2 members and an alternate, or 1 member and an alternate?
It should be 2 members that participate in the policy committee meeting, each meeting, and then an alternate in case
Right.
one of the 2 can't make
And
it.
so it's Daniel and you now stepping in as the members.
Correct. So we still need an alternate.
Mark? Yeah. I think we need Mark there because of his experience with the tools and yeah, he's got his 30 years of Muni experience will come in very handy in that committee. So it's a real natural. Okay, so we'll go back over the list of who is where, but that's the general plan with some comments. And Anna, you had something else? Anna?
Yeah, I guess a couple of so I think this is a good plan. So I don't have feedback on the specifics so much, but I just wanted to raise a couple big picture questions because I don't know the answer to these. One is because this is getting to the kind of what committee of the whole or what, you know, how we use committees generally. So one is we've used sometimes the practice to refer ordinances to things. And I think that's a good, that's a good function of committees. We don't act like the legislature where everything has to go through committee. And I'm not suggesting we do that at all. But I guess I wonder how much we see if we want to increase that function. And because that gets to sorry, I'm not being very articulate. It gets to the idea of like, if they're all committees of the whole, then the expectation is that generally we're all going to every committee. And the whole theory behind having different committees, which is how the legislature operates, is you've got some members who are responsible for some of that content. And I don't think it's an either or, but I just want to raise that because if we're moving toward more committee of the whole, then it's really that we're using it more as a process. Yeah, as a work session or just the expectation is that we're all there most of the time, right? So that's I guess just a couple things to put on the table. And then if we want to keep with the idea that we have subsets of members who are more taking responsibility for those things, I think there's pros and cons either way, right? But I think we should anyway. I guess I just wanted to offer that as something to think about as we talk about this committee of the whole situation. And I'll use the legislative committee, for example. I'm not advocating that that's a committee of the whole. It has a function. Hopefully people who are interested in that and want to take more of an active role in that would participate in that. But it's also a vehicle to produce something that we all have to vote on, which is the legislative program. So that's one where I wouldn't advocate to change the structure, but I would expect that during a couple of those conversations that more people would go, right? But also, anyway, I guess I'll stop there because I'm not.
I'll just answer that. And it's my intent as we merge and continue going through this iterative process to reduce the numbers of committees of the whole, because it's just not practical. There's too much. We can't all be everywhere. Mr. Presria.
So yeah, I'd love to. I don't know if this is if you'd like to expand more on that, because I have the same line of questioning around the role of the committees. And I mean, this has always been true, at least since I've been on the body, is they've served a variety of functions. And often from the public's perspective, they can feel like the one meeting that they can attend to talk about a particular issue, and to be able to hear more in depth about what's going on with that issue. And so that seems to be a vital need, whether that's a committee or not. And then the relationship between the assembly and the different departments, and the ability for the assembly to get a sense of what's happening within the municipality at a high level, but still, doing our job in terms of the oversight of the city, and then of course, working through possible policy changes or funding allocations, and being able to have a more of a work session-y kind of environment, because that's so I am curious about if they're going to function as all of those, then it's difficult, I think, to have. Yeah, it's difficult for us to do all of those. I think that's the question. And maybe the better question for me to ask is, do we pull the work session function out of those and have more work sessions, or do we put the work session back in it and have fewer work sessions and just have less time for those other two items that I mentioned?
Yeah, and I think what will practically happen is we'll review and reduce the number of committees of the whole. We will have smaller participation in the various committees. We will continue to have a place for the public to be heard at the committee meetings. That's how we do it. I don't think we can reduce the number of work sessions we have, because the work sessions tend to be very specific to an item that's timely. That's generally speaking the thing that gets a work session prioritized. It's timely and it's coming, and we need more information now, rather than having pop-up or ad hoc committee meetings to do the same thing. So, but obviously we're still working through this. And we want a place for the departments to come and brief us, and we want a place for that exchange of information. So it's really key.
One other thing I would just, if I may, I think that I've said this before, but I think part of the problem with the committees in terms of how they functioned has been the reality of where we are right now for the last few years. And I think that we don't know what's going to happen in terms of the next administration. But I think that is just, I mean, I'm not saying that as a political statement, but just as a functional statement, that this administration has functioned differently than the previous administration and will likely function differently than the future administration if it's a different administration. And so I think partly this framework that you're talking about, my only worry is that it's in reaction to our current situation. And I would just want to make sure that we're having a thoughtful conversation about what's a sustainable structure and that actually gets us to what we're trying to accomplish. And so that's that. I think you may be thinking that way, and I think you are, but I just want to put that on the record I want to make sure that we're thinking about what's the right structure based on what we're trying to accomplish, and not necessarily a reaction to the dysfunction that's happened over the last few years. And I say that as chair of the Public Safety Committee, that committee has not functioned as it should have for a while. And so, but I think in a different relationship with the administration, it would have and could have. So.
Absolutely. And, much of it broke when the mandate came that the department heads could only talk to the assembly through one person. And so we're still unpacking what that effect was. But again, going back to the goals, streamline our committees so we have fewer and better use of our time. 2 is to keep it manageable in relationship to our resources and capacity and make sure it's relevant. And then finally, give each department a pathway to work with us. And so those are the 3 primary constraints that I'm going to make sure we get through this process. So, Ms. Zalato.
Thanks. So I would just hold up the Enterprise Utilities Oversight Committee as a little bit different structure, and one I would challenge chairs to think of, committees to think about. That one is usually talking about specific upcoming legislation in the context of their overall operations. And I find that really helpful. Rarely do we need to hold a work session on particular ordinances or appropriations concerning the enterprises and utilities. And I find that really helpful because when we talk about those action items coming to the body, we're actually talking about making sure we're putting it in the context of their larger operations. So I just would hold that out as I think a really well-functioning committee, and I find a lot of value in that. And I like to talk with departments in the context of what they have coming for us, in addition to their general briefing. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add that took some real discipline to create that culture. And that was done by intent, that folks who are in charge of the enterprises and utilities realized that they were going to have to have a very uncomfortable public conversation at the assembly if their projects hadn't been briefed at the committee, because we're going to ask all the questions we're going to ask at the committee on the dais. And so after just a little while, folks realized that the best way to talk about their projects without having all the lights and cameras on, just one instead of all of the public glare, is to do it at the committee. And so that is certainly one framework that chairs can approach the committee work with, is to ensure that the folks who have ordinances or resolutions, appropriations coming forward that fall within the purview of that subject area understand, A, that they can go to that committee to brief it, and in fact, they're invited to, and it might save them some headaches if they do. Anyhow, so Ms. Zalato makes a good point, and I think it's a cultural issue by committee. Anyone else on this topic? More work to do. Thank you for keeping my feet to the fire on getting it organized. Okay, so the fun part. Next, we're going to have a briefing on how to read an election certification memorandum. So, Jamie, you have the floor.
Thank you. So certification is always laid on the table, and I pass out a document that's 179 pages, and that is never easy to consume in the very short period of time that you have to consume it. So I just wanted to quickly go over the certification of this last regular meeting. That original document was 176 pages. So the first 5 pages are the clerk's report. It's required by code. We try to give some preliminary information in the beginning. This year, we used our ProVoter technology. Last year, we talked about redistricting and what is the word I'm looking for? Reapportionment. Thank you. And then we always add that we're willing to do this in a work session, so I'm just doing it here. And then we get to the guts of what I'm supposed to report according to the code, which is that the results of the commission's ballot review is enclosed. And then if it's determined that the election was validly held, the assembly shall certify the results of the election. And then we've been adding information about challenges and complaints in the last few years since 2021. And this year we only had one of each. I'm kidding, just one challenge. And then that challenge was denied by the commission. We didn't have any complaints this year. And then we give some statistics, which is how many ballot packages were mailed, how many military and overseas, and that type of information, how many rejected information, which comes from the commission's report, and how the ballots come in by post office, Dropbox, ABCs, or electronic voting. And then this year, William added voter turnout, so you can see over time what our voter turnout looks like. And so again, we moved to vote by mail, vote at home in 2018. For the packets in front of you, but also page 6 for the folks tuning in online, this is the Election Commission report. And so these are all of the ballots that were rejected. These are ballots that do not comply with the code. Empty ballot return envelope that contained other materials, a ballot returned without a return envelope, and we were unable to identify who the voter was. The ballot return envelope being postmarked after Election Day, no postmark, and received after Election Day. And then no sig matches, and then people who voted out, people who weren't registered in time or who weren't registered in the municipality at all. So the commission goes through in their public session of canvass and rejects all of those ballots. The next set of information is starts on page 8. And this is the official results, the summary reports, the official results, the unofficial results that we've been seeing day after day from Election Day through to certification. This official one is printed after the public session of canvass and is the last official one. And so one thing I want to point out is the last few pages of this report. So in what it's 21, 22, 23, and is this is the ins and the outs. So when we have like road service, ARDSA, road service drainage area, everybody in the municipality votes on it. The people inside of the service area are voting on whether they want the work to be done, and then everyone votes on the full faith and credit of the municipality. And so how that looks is everyone who's voting on the full faith and credit on from the municipality is in the first 8 pages. This time it was on page 17. And then on page 21 is the folks who are in the service area itself. So both of those have to pass in order for that work to actually be done. And so that is what the last few pages are. This is a report printed from the tabulation system, and there's nothing that we can, this is the facts. So then, starting on page 24 is hundreds of pages, maybe not hundreds, many, many pages of the statements of vote cast. And that is another report that we put in here. It's to make it a permanent record, but it is down to the precinct level of how the election went. So our statistician friends can report back how each precinct votes typically. It's a report that's printed out. There's nothing there that can be changed about it. It's just more facts. And then the other thing that I want to highlight that is towards the end, it's on page 24 of the little packet that I gave you, is the risk limiting audit. This audit is now done after the public session of Canvas, but before certification. And this is where we randomly select a number of ballots and we hand count them and then compare them to the cast vote record in the tabulation system to ensure that the results that are printing out are accurate. So in a mayoral election, we pull out 5% of the ballots and we confirm that in each individual batch that is run through the scanners is exact. And the very last page, the report explains how all of this is done and how many batches we ended up pulling. And we do one candidate race and one proposition race. In a mayoral year, we always do the mayor's race. And then I don't see it here, but there's a report at the very end of it that's it's usually in color orange and blue, and it'll say batch number whatever had so many votes for candidate 1, so many votes for candidate 2, and then so many others. And then the proposition, whatever we looked at, had so many votes for yes, so many votes for no, and so many other. And other is overvote, undervote, filled in the O of the no instead of the bubble to the left of no, and random stuff. And you can see that every time we've done a risk limiting audit for you guys, it's always been perfect. There are always a human error, but we always go back and look at it and see those things that I just mentioned. Somebody overvoted, and in our quick sort and stack method, we were looking at yes and we threw it in the yes, but it ended up that it was an overvote because yes and no were both filled out. So we ultimately go back and confirm that we made that error in the hand count piece because the computer has always been right. So those are really all that you guys probably want to look at in the heat of the moment is maybe that risk limiting audit piece and the commission's report and my report. And then you can probably, if you're curious about how people vote in certain precincts, go back and look at the statement of vote cast, which is 90% of this report. So that's all I really have, but I'm happy to answer questions.
There are a couple. I have one, but first, Mr. Salt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Hines, just a curiosity question. As I was filling out my ballot last week, it pertains to the ability to mark the ballot and have a witness signature. I was just curious if you track that data, how many people actually just put a mark and then have a witness sign, or if that's something you don't track, you just verify when the ballots come in. Just curiosity.
So I don't have a number off the top of my head. I could guess 20. The signature verification team kicks them out as other challenge, and then the clerk and the election administrator look at them, and we track the names of the witnesses just to ensure that the same witness isn't witnessing ballot after ballot after ballot. And we've never seen anything in a situation like that, but they do go through a little extra scrutiny to ensure that there isn't, it's not an it isn't being used fraudulently.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you.
Also, we added these new machines where folks who might have some signing challenges can come in and vote in private alone, keep a secret ballot, whether they have visual challenges or mobility challenges where they use that air system Yeah, and so we're continuously working to refine that process to make it so that voters have the right to vote in secret.
Right, and so they get to vote in secret, and then if they do have challenges with being able to sign and need to vote in X, the election staff in the AVCs are able to witness for them. And they have already showed their ID as well, so.
Okay, Ms. Bradley, go ahead.
Yeah, just a question about the risk limiting audit, and because you mentioned basically you guys take a sample, and I'm guessing that's basically a large enough to be statistically valid sample, is that right?
Yeah, we use 5%. The state of Alaska uses 5%. And if we were to find an error, you would go and find more and try to find out what happened. But we haven't encountered that yet, so I can't tell you how that would work.
Okay. Yeah, basically like the 5% is the step one, and then if there has to be a step two, then it's a more thorough look. And I mention that only because I know, having worked on some stats projects and things, it always feels like it's a smaller sample than what you would think, because you would think, oh, how can that smaller group possibly be representative? But that's just the way statistics work. So, so I'm mostly stating that just to be clear that even though it is not a large sample size in terms of the total number of ballots cast, that there is a logic behind it.
Yeah, and we, I don't know, we use a Berkeley. It's called a pseudo random number generator, and we roll 10-sided dice 2 different times and put in a seed, and then we tell it how many numbers we want it to pull based on a percentage of how many ballots were run through each ICC, and then it randomly tells us which batches to pull. So there's some from the beginning, there's some from the end, there's some from the middle, and then we use the random order too. So the first year we started with the lowest number batch, and then we realized, well, that only got the beginning of the election. So then we realized we should do it in the random order that it gave us.
Ms. Littlefield.
Okay, got it on. I got a quick question on page 4, and it kind of boggled my mind because I never really envisioned that the drop boxes would overweigh the mail-in. And it's a continuous trend that the drop boxes are going up and the USPS is going down. Do we have enough drop boxes? Okay. Locations, because we have one in Eagle River, and I know where it's at because I go there. I'm probably cheap and I don't want to put a stamp on it. So just wondering if we have enough, because it seems to be a trend that's going the opposite direction.
Yeah, that's something we can look into. We do have the very big ones at Lusac and in Eagle River, and then the rest are the smaller ones. And I feel like we have them all over town, but we can confirm that they're in good spots all over town. There's also they are on municipal property, so they're on school district property or municipally owned property, so that most of them, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 that don't have a camera on them, but they have cameras on them, and so that would be another factor into it. But yeah, we can confirm that.
And I just would add a little editorial on that. It's not just that it's cheaper to send it in the Dropbox, but it's also guaranteed delivery. And so with the vote by mail part of it, rather than the Dropbox, if you deliver your ballot to a mailbox the day before or the day of the election, there's a chance it doesn't get canceled until the day after the election through the metering system. Your vote won't count. And so there is more risk there. I always tell people the drop boxes are the best alternative, and the statistics are proving that they're hearing it's the way to go. USPS, if you have to, drop boxes, they're everywhere. So maybe we do analyze where they are and if we need to expand. I know there's an issue with storage. We have to have a place to keep them, and at some point you get to a point of diminishing returns. But I was having the same thought, and I saw a picture on a social media post of a Dropbox, and I couldn't figure out where it was, and that was kind of awesome because I used to know where they all were, and there are more. So I had myself in the queue. Oh wait, Ms. Brawley, you had a question? Okay, my question is on the next page. This stat of turnout. I'm always frustrated by the turnout stat, because if you compare that to the graphic on page 3, ballot packages mailed versus the registered voters at the time, there's a delta between the orange and the blue, which are all those folks who haven't voted in a number of years. They're in that, I forget the code name, but they're generally speaking people that the state is moving into a category to be removed from the voter rolls because we've sent a postcard, they've been communicated with, we don't hear back from them, they don't return a ballot. And so effectively, they're not voters, that delta between the orange and the blue. And so with some exceptions, obviously. So going back to the graphic on page 5, my question is, could a savvy statistical analyst come up with an unofficial number for turnout that basically accepts the number of ballots that we didn't mail, that we find in those categories that the state has allowed us not to? So then we can, in a kind of validated way, maybe not, we can't use it as true data, but a validated way, show that the percentage is actually a bit higher.
Yeah, I think that what I thought about this at 3 a.m. this morning, I think what would be also helpful in this voter turnout percentage is the actual number, because 20% in 2013 is going to be a different number, different percentage than 20% in 2024 based on this weird situation we're in with the voter registration database.
So it would be great if we could have somebody conduct that analysis where we come up with a line that's a little bit higher than that line there with different percentages. It would be the same number, but that accepts out the 20 or 30,000 that we know aren't real. And so, and if we are watching, and we're watching the state is moving a bill that is looking to fix some of these issues. I don't know that it's getting any motion in the next week, but so it might have to start over, but we'll see. What I would hope we can do is also be able to show the numbers of who are in that category, like a report on we have all these undeliverables, the folks who we don't mail to anymore. I forget the code names again, but that would be also helpful in this report,
Okay.
so that a third party without any insight could do the calculation.
It's list maintenance, undeliverable. So list maintenance are the people who haven't voted in 4 years. And then undeliverable is folks who have had mail delivered by elections to them and it has been returned to the Division of Elections or us as undeliverable. And then purge notice, we don't usually get a purge notice person because they're purged like in January. So they've already made it through that 8-year process. And then LU means they're in list maintenance and also undeliverable. And we have in 2022 or 2022, the Election Commission put forth a resolution suggesting some changes to state law. And some of them made them into a bill in 2023, but it doesn't have any traction at this point. But after some things that I saw this year, I think that it might be helpful to revisit that.
Right, and I do know that the bill isn't dead in Juneau until next week, and so anything could happen, but Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, on the bill, the one that I understand is being discussed now, I think is HB 129. And Kawasaki is, Senator Kawasaki, who's head of state affairs, I think is looking, anyway, so whatever comes out of it, that's what's going to be.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things had been added to his original bill, and I believe he's added it to this bill. I know I read that he was going for stuff that's no cost, but I think there's probably a specific piece of language that could be added to change the interpretation of the law. The interpretation of the law is that the voter has to make contact with the Division of Elections. So federal law says that they could use the national change of address form as a way to update, but our law doesn't say that, and there's an interpretation that it has to be voter contact, so they can't use that that change of address form. So I think there's some things a little bit of verbiage that could change interpretation.
Yeah, and I think we'll see what happens after next week. And then if we want to keep making that a priority to advocate for, then we can make sure that stays in the legislative program and work in the in-between. I was actually curious about the number of voters, so I'm glad that came up, that chart that showed voter turnout. I would like to see the number, because the other reason I keep wondering, if we've lost thousands of people in population, at what point does that start showing up in all of these numbers, right? The number of voters. And I know some of that is part of that story, but I'm just interested. The other thing that I would like to request, if it's available, but I think it would be interesting to include, is the number of newly registered voters. I don't know if we get that information, because to me, there's two categories. There's people who move here, and then there's people who turn 18. And because we have automatic voter registration through the PFD, it seems like people who turn 18 here, like they're and I'm thinking back to door knocking, just, a long list of people who live clearly or still get mail at their parents' house. And then that person may or may not be in state. And it's a good thing, because it means that we are actually registering folks, because I know that's always an issue, is that people in their teens and 20s don't necessarily vote right away or don't pursue getting registered. But I think that would be an interesting statistic to know if it's collected somewhere and we could put it in there, knowing that you guys are not going to go out and do like a full gathering that data. But if it's available, I think it'd be an interesting statistic.
So, and I would just offer that we haven't seen a substantial decrease in participation. We've seen an increase, really. We did have a slight decrease in the regular election. She has it up on the board up here. This year, relative to 3 years ago, the last regular mayoral election, by about 2,500 votes. So that's a downward turn there. But if you look at the returns for the other years, it's just continuing a slow, steady climb, very slow. The curve is kind of flattened out after the implementation of the vote from home process. The biggest year was the first year of vote from home, and it was just wild. And then, of course, the runoff election that happened in 2021. So, but it is good information to track. And it would, data nerds would love to know, people are moving in, people are turning 18, how many are dying?
So I have it. So if anybody wants it, they can do a records request and I can email it to them.
Just an email. So, okay, Randy, well, last talk on the subject. We'll move on.
Okay, so just be remiss if I didn't say to Ms. Hines, thank you to you and your team for managing the system and the ballot tracking. I've used it the past year or so, and it works flawlessly. And anyone that's not using it, I strongly encourage them to take advantage of the system. It just helps you track your ballot through the system. And thank you and your team for that. Appreciate it.
And that website is anchoragevotes.com.
Yep.
I could say that in my sleep.
Yep.
Because I say it everywhere I go,
And
anchoragevotes.com.
that's Williams. That's what he's pushing for right now.
There's also, for folks who might be listening, Text to Cure, which is a very important and vital system. If you go into this table, the most frustrating thing about the report for everybody, I think, is on page 6. And it's basically line 33. And that's 600 people who returned ballots who we couldn't compare their signature and get them voting. And that number was closer to 1,300, I think, when the election started in the regular election. And one by one, folks cured their ballots. They ticked it off. We called them, we sent letters. We did everything that we could do. The Text to Cure allowed people to be notified, and some people just sent back information by their phones. And so the goal is to reduce that number to as close to zero as possible. Because that, to me, is the most frustrating piece of it all, is those folks who get the letter after the election with that wah-wah sound that says, we're sorry, your ballot wasn't counted. And that's just miserable. And in a close election, that might make a difference. And so, that's the area where we need to continuously improve. And that's where the AnchorageVotes.com process is great, because it will tell you, even without the Text to Cure, if your ballot was not completely accepted. Like I got the note yesterday, your ballot will be counted, which means the signature matched, it made it through every step. And so that system will tell you if you have a problem. It's just brilliant. So, Mr. Salt, thank you for thanking the clerk and the elections team. Thanks for due. Okay, now, Mr. Salt, it is your chance to present AO 2024-35.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So let's start with the why for this one. So the reason why I brought this forward is two reasons. One, we remember when residents of Girdwood came down to testify, and they have to wait to the end of the meeting. Sometimes there's snow, sometimes it runs late, and they still have, roughly an hour drive to get back home. Also, probably the latest genesis of this was we recently had a meeting, probably a month, maybe a month and a half ago, where a gentleman wanted to testify, and he waited to the very end of the meeting, and surprisingly left right before he allowed public testimony. So I know everyone has mixed feelings on this, and I think if anything, bringing this forward at least causes us to discuss the issue, debate it, and maybe look at it on a regular basis. So what this AO does, and there's two ways to go about it, is it really tries to provide a fixed 30 minutes of public testimony at the beginning of the regular meeting, special meetings. Realizing that not every meeting do we have 30 minutes of testimony, and sometimes we do. The other option was to expand the initial audience appearance to more than 3 people. But again, we rarely have 3 people, and often on a sensitive issue, people will stay and talk. I didn't pick the audience participation component to expand that number because sometimes we have late on the table items, or we have S versions or other changes that it's hard for the public to put in advance. So again, what this does is it provides a fixed 30 minutes maximum at the beginning of the meeting to allow for that initial audience comment period, which I think is a good thing. However, as we saw on Tuesday, it can also, and it wasn't initial public participation, but it could be a bad thing where we have certain high flyers that we certainly don't need to have more of. So this is probably the best I could do to put something forward. And again, I know it may not have strong support, but at least it challenges us to reconsider from time to time how we hear the voices of our public at meetings. Thank you.
A couple of people in the queue. Ms. Altel.
Thank you. Couple of ideas or things to consider, particularly with regard to Girdwood. That is tough when they have the drive, and if the item's set for public hearing, and if it's a later time for that public hearing, that could be tough. I think there's a couple of ways that we can use just Robert's rules without changing the code to address that. One, of course, sponsors of items could try to work with the chair, particularly if they're for an outlying community like Girdwood, to talk through that scheduling, particularly for the public hearing. Also, if it appears that the majority of the people who are likely there to testify they're moved to change the order of the day. So I think that there are some tools already in our toolbox without necessarily changing the code. I think it's an interesting proposition to consider appearance requests versus set aside time. The appearance requests aren't always full. We can take up to 3. You do have to pre-plan, but I think that as members, when we know there are folks who have something they want to say, we can better educate our constituents on how to access that process. Because quite frankly, our most consistent appearance requests are from the same folks who've learned how to access that and then come and speak with us. So I think before a code change, I think there might be some other tools we already have in our toolbox that we could deploy to meet, what I think are some legitimate concerns by Mr. Salt and possibly other members. just thinking back to when we used to have initial audience participation, even though it was time limited as to certain time frame within the meeting, that became quite problematic because more people than would be feasible to speak in that time would line up. And then there was considerable pressure to extend that. So, right, that becomes the issue. If it's on the agenda to happen, then it leaves it open for members to move to extend that. And then we just push back our business further and further. So some things to consider. Thanks.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. I had 3 questions. One, well, and then also to say, I was just thinking back to, it is interesting. I was just reading the existing code that's also in this ordinance. And I can see that we are different from, say, a regulatory board, because I'm familiar with boards that say, for example, there is a time for audience participation or testimony or whatever it's called that's outside of the items on their agenda, but then you cannot speak on an item outside or on the agenda, right? Because they're saying you can't just use that time outside of that item. So just to note, that is not in our code. So we do contemplate the idea that you could do an appearance request or final audience participation on something that was on the agenda or is on the agenda outside the public hearing. So that seems like it's possible. My 2 questions are, when did audience participation start? Because the memo says that it was removed in 2022, but that's not really the full story as I understand it.
Yeah, it started, I think, in 2019.
Okay, so it's a relatively new practice.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question was just to Randy, I'm looking specifically at the wording. And I'm looking at page 1. It says the chair may prioritize persons who credibly declare they are unable to remain at the meeting for final audience participation. So I guess I'm just curious, like how you would picture that looks like. And I mean, like in the night of the meeting, you've got 3 people who come up and then time is running short and they say, hey, I can't stay. How would that work?
Thank you. Through the chair, and Chair may speak on this as well. We've had this before, and it was around maybe students that wanted to come forward and speak. They had to get home, get to bed, for they had school the next day, or again, maybe people from Girdwood that needed to get back and couldn't stay the rest of the meeting. So it was a voluntary ask, and we took volunteers on face value that they were reporting the truth of why they couldn't stay later. Thanks.
And I will offer that it's not a practical approach. There's no way to practically manage that. If you set that standard, it doesn't matter. People will take that time. And so you just have to practically assume that everybody's going to have a reason why they can't stay, and the chair can't arbitrate that in the middle of a meeting. And so to me, that section is like, I can't even imagine trying to implement it. Ms. Braga and then Mr. Presverdia.
I was kind of wondering, I know the school board does pre-sign up, and you possibly we could have a link, but they have their speakers for the night lined up prior to the meeting. And so, if we have 30 minutes, then 10 people could sign up for a meeting. I was also thinking about the idea, if you want to hear the voice of lots of different people, you only give one of those 10 slots once a month to an individual, so that you're shifting around. Different people in the city have an opportunity for one of those coveted beginning of the meeting slots. They could stay to the end, but.
So I have a practical rule, a custom that I've established, and it's a little less welcoming than what you just proposed. It's once a quarter. Once a month is a problem. We have one individual who would be on every agenda if we allowed. And it's not a good use of the public's time and our city's business to do that. So I set up once a quarter, and if they have some extraordinary circumstance, fine, maybe they could make that argument. But for now, what the rule is, we set a calendar. We even give them letters that say, you will be eligible again on this date. There's actually 2 of them that would be at every meeting that I can think of. One of them spoke at our last meeting. And so, okay, Mr. Gates. Dean?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add a little historical perspective related to Ms. Brawley's comments about where other bodies, boards, or the school districts said for audience participation or appearance requests, you couldn't testify on something that was on the agenda that night. And we did have that language. It's not in our current code. We used to have that limitation on audience participation. It was taken out in 2020 by an ordinance, 2023, yes. We also had included that limitation for audience participation as opposed to appearance requests. We included that limitation in 2017 by an ordinance, and that was also taken out in 2020 when we added initial audience participation as well. So we used to have a limitation on the subject matter of testimony, not something that's also on the agenda the same evening. I guess the idea at the time was that people speak on whatever they want if they couldn't stay for the later public hearing time. But I guess, as some people would say, we saw that abused by some regulars who would speak at initial audience participation and have an appearance request and speak at the final on something that was also a public hearing item. So, I mean, that was rare, but it happened.
Yeah, so it was 2020, not 2019, that was implemented. It's very interesting timing. Very interesting timing. And we eliminated those barriers to what you can speak on if it's not on the agenda, as Mr. Gates suggested, because we attempted to make that time available for those who could not stay for items that were later on the agenda. We literally went through this whole conversation and learned the hard way. That it wasn't manageable to make a constraint like that meaningful with the public, because the public will do what they're going to do when the floor is there and open. Others want to speak on this item?
That's small.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, Mr. Prisrita, you're on the list.
Oh,
Go
it's,
ahead.
it's okay. And I thought we were using first names.
Sorry. Yeah, I just have it. Cameron.
You get used to it.
Yeah.
No, I understand. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Yeah, I am not in favor of bringing this back. I watched this when it was put into place, and I don't think, as much as I really do want to create more opportunities for the public to engage with us, I don't think this is the right way to do it. I think that I'd like to think creatively about, how to create opportunities for the public to feel like that they can come and talk with us that's outside of email or outside of phone calls, which we get a lot of. But I think it's really difficult to manage this, as was stated previously, and it has created a great deal of disruption in our meetings, and made it really hard to get the work of the assembly done. So. That being said, I also really appreciate the system of when people sign up, and request to be heard in the beginning. And I think that I don't know if there's anything we can do to adjust that to make that an easier process, or something that people can utilize more often. But that's really helpful because we are able to know who's there, and there's a set time and a set number, and we should continue to encourage people to utilize that. That's all.
Just note that it isn't a difficult process. They just send a form with a little note that says, this is what I want to talk about, and it walks through the process. It needs to be timely, so we can get it on the agenda properly, but it's not a hard process. I think that maybe the action on that account would be to communicate it better, the method and how you access it, because I send that to people all the time. Like, they have a concern they want to talk about. Did you have your hand up? Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I just got a quick question. I watched this in the beginning when we had it at the start, and now it's at the end. Is there somewhere in the agenda where we can do the sign up and they can come in and talk? Somewhere in the middle, so we're not loading this up on the front end or the rear end. I'm just trying to see if there's anywhere in the agenda that can be mixed in.
So the trick is our meetings are really business meetings that we need to get the work done, and the reality is the workload has increased in a way that wasn't really anticipated before, where there are several times last year and the last quarter even that we did not complete our agenda because we didn't have enough time. And so we're having special meetings, second special meetings to get the work done. And so think of it like a balloon, our time, And if you squeeze here, it pushes out there. And so what that means is we'll just have to have more meetings. And so that's the outcome. Is the reason it's at the end, practically speaking, is we've completed the work we're supposed to do for the day. Now, a member could at any time make a motion to change the order of the day, take up audience participation, and get it done. That is an option a member would have at any time. Sometimes it would be timely, but mostly we want to get through the work. Would be the reality is let's get through the work, and then we'll hear broadly from the public on what matters. So it could be at another time. That's something worth thinking through. Another thing that the school district has a habit of doing that the assembly could contemplate, but I'm not going to recommend it because, again, our calendar is so full. The school district has in the past had work sessions and meetings where they just take public hearing, public comment. And so there is an argument to be said that we could set up just a quarterly or sometime meeting like a town hall where we just hear from people. The problem with that is it sounds great in the abstract. And then when it comes down to it, it's your least favorite meeting that you're not going to attend because participation is voluntary and two of us are going to show up, have no quorum, and to get yelled at. And so there's just some practical realities to whatever we create. We have to really think through the scenarios of what it might mean, because it just has a way of doing its thing. Anna?
Yeah, I guess another kind of big picture thing to think about with this, and those kind of questions, right, is, and I take Chris's point, right, it's a business meeting, and all of these are considered limited public forum, right, so they are not a free-for-all, and that was really one of the big issues with some members of the public the last few years, has been to basically treat that as a free-for-all, or not really understand the rules or the boundaries in which they were engaging, right, again, because it is not just standing on the street corner, right, that there's rules and there's topics and so on. I think another thing to think about is kind of what is the purpose of this? So the public hearing on an agenda item, the specific purpose is to hear from the public, but really so that the public has an opportunity before the debate begins to possibly influence the outcome, right? That's what it's for. Initial audience participation isn't really for that, or it's not for that. That's not topic specific. So clearly it could be to influence an outcome for something. And same with the audience participation. It could be for that specific purpose. It could just be really to have time to say something on the record, right? But again, within that limited public forum. And also it's honestly, more often than not, by some individuals, used as basically just a publicity platform or an opportunity because you are on camera, right? The actual reality is that it is local TV and there's a number of folks who watch it. And so to the extent that there is a tendency by some people and it's kind of by design, or that's the way that it ends up being, is that they are using it for a platform that is not to influence a specific piece of legislation. It is certainly important to have opportunity to do that. But I think, again, that's where I keep struggling with what is the right answer, because I think we want to hear from the public. We want to make that available. We don't want to constrain it to the point that people can't say things or talk about things, even if they aren't on our agenda. But also the reality is, to what extent are we creating a platform in which we are also the audience, right? And that is not, I understand that's not the purpose of that, right? And so anyway, that's just something else to think about.
Just one thing that Mr. Von Daniel would say is that by us prioritizing this, we very well effectively deprioritize the people who are there to testify on public hearing items. And so the public hearing items are part of the agenda. It's our business. And if we're adding an hour, 40 minutes, 30 minutes of time, it pushes all of those people who are here for the business that we're to conduct back into time, so that their opportunity to have their rights honored are in some ways made second class. Meg.
Yeah, thanks. So I think it's been a really good conversation. I think there are a couple of things to stress that I've heard out of it. One is the reminder that in our committee meetings, we have an audience participation on the agendas. And so if you have folks who want to talk about particular topics, but maybe not items, and I know it's tough, they're during the day, but we also take phone testimony for audience participation in those meetings. Come and talk to us and tell us what's on your mind around that topic. Two, we do take phone testimony, and I think that's really important. We've really seen a drop off of people signing up for phone testimony, but it is and remains available. And lastly, we've changed it so that by using that testimony form, your emailed thoughts go into the record now. And I know I prioritize looking at those, right before the meeting as part of my prep on the agenda. So I think we've opened up more and more ways to communicate. It's just figuring out the communication that is desired and then the best avenue for it. I'm not sure that we need new avenues. We just need to be better at talking about which avenues are most effective for the various types of communication. Thanks.
All right, Cameron, and then Karen.
So one point I think was already made, and that is that that by prioritizing this, we're deprioritizing other things. I think that's really important. But the one point I haven't heard yet is that we what started to happen was people were so anxious to get first in line in this that they were waiting out at the front door and queuing up a half an hour before the meeting even started or further along. And then they were rushing to the front of the line and standing there and forming this line. So, and the very same people were doing that over and over and over again. And so even for those people who would benefit, as it said, to go early, they weren't getting a chance to, because there were folks who saw that as an opportunity for them to speak, and they were taking advantage of that thing. So I think that this is really hard to manage, and I would just repeat that I think all of us want to hear from the public and want to create opportunities for them to do that. This just does not seem like the right mechanism to do that effectively. Thanks.
I would add just a note to that. That is very worst. This is no exaggeration. There was a pushing scrum for who gets to be first, to the point where people got arrested. People actually got arrested for pushing their way into the front of the line. And I'll never forget that. I even know their names because some of them are really mad at me still, and some of them were really shocked that their government would arrest them. But when the police come in and give you a command and you don't listen because you want to hold your place in line, it literally happened that way. It was quite a scene. Karen.
So I was thinking possibly the appearance requests could be expanded a little bit so that it'd be controlled, then they'd be signed up in advance. You could control that they only did it once per quarter. I see some validity to that. The other thing that popped in my head the other night, that man that was from Palmer, and I know during COVID there were a lot of Valley people coming and testifying. Is there anything in the code that says that? I mean, it seems like Anchorage municipal citizens should be the ones that get priority to speak.
So the dean might have a legal opinion on this, but I'm not an attorney, but I think that this question has been explored any number of times. And the public forum that is created, the limited public forum, is open to the public at large, and people who live in Wasilla are members of the public. And there is no meaningful way to tell them they can't participate. And so there was one public hearing that happened in 2009 in which busloads of people were brought in to the municipality to testify, and it caused a public hearing to extend for weeks and weeks and weeks. And they've been down this road. And so for practical purposes, the answer, much like saying only people who can't stay till later, there's no way to manage it. Yeah. Yeah. Mark. Yeah, in fact, Eugene Carl Haberman was a Palmer resident, and he came to almost every one of our meetings. Yeah, he in the 70s, he was Anchorage. Mark, and then Dean.
Go ahead, let Dean.
Dean. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to vouch for what Mr. Constant said, that we do have a legal analysis from several years back about who can participate and who can testify in the public. And this all stems from our charter language, and So if you want to change that, we need a charter amendment. It's in our charter section 1705, the sentence that says, well, all meetings of the assembly, school board, and boards and commissions shall be public. And then another sentence a little later, at each such meeting, the public shall have reasonable opportunity to be heard. So it just refers to the public, not to residents of the municipality, which would have given us the ability to limit that more and exclude Wasilla folks. But so anyways, that's what we have.
I don't
That's
want
why
to
it's
pick
on
on
every single
Wasilla. There have been
agenda
some
for committees.
great testifiers that have come in from the valley. We've had some really good input. So, Mark.
Meg brought up an interesting point. In all of our committees we have here, it's open for audience participation, yet we don't have anybody. And I think what the public is seeing is that their only opportunity is during our assembly meetings when they're not aware of it. I mean, we could have 5 people talk here and they could say what they want to say during the day instead of waiting until 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night. So I don't know how we can get that word out that this is an opportunity for everybody to talk to instead of the one assembly meeting or the
Right.
2 every month.
And I think that gets back to the solution that I suggested. We should think about a promo campaign that just communicates out, again, all the ways you can participate. And we have like this Assembly 101 materials with YouTube videos that were developed that are still pretty useful for folks. And so it might be that we build in an annual process for public engagement education, where we just tell the public, hey, this is how you do it, because it is fully reasonable to do that. Go ahead, Claire. Yeah.
Legislative Services is hoping for a mellow May and June, and that Assembly 101 stuff is pretty high on our list to tackle next. And one of our goals is to promote the committee meetings more, because we're like, why doesn't anyone come to committee meetings? They can be really juicy sometimes, and the public isn't there. So it definitely is a goal of ours to get more community participation in committee meetings.
When there's a spicy topic, the public comes. The Housing Homelessness Committee always has a few people that are here to testify. And so I think it depends on what's on your menu if the public is going to participate. But broadly, there's a better job we could do. Randy, take us home.
Thank you. You know, this is exactly what I wanted to achieve, is everyone talking about this and kind of bringing tips and tricks forward. I think that satisfies my need and maybe the public's need. You know, one thing we could also do is start putting these as taglines on our emails as far as guiding people how to navigate the system and testify. But I really appreciate everyone's involvement, and I most likely will postpone this indefinitely, because really what I wanted was what we just did. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So that takes us through that part of our agenda. Next, I don't know that this needs much belaboring at this committee. The next topic is laid on the table items. I don't think so much this is an issue of the assembly. It's just been a couple of times recently where the administration really hammered us with items that were unanticipated and laid on the table. And so, but I will reiterate it, that the goal is to not have laid on the table items except in circumstances that are exigent because of time constraints that are very important, must be met, that if it can be on a regular agenda or the addendum, that is 100% the best place to do it. The laid on the table procedure is there for a reason. We ask members to hold us to account. When the question is asked, this item requires 8 votes to lay this item on the table. The introducer, the sponsor, must justify to you all why this must pass tonight and can't wait until the next meeting. And this just, errors happen. Bad things happen when you lay things on the table. And the bad things are items get missed, items get misfiled, items get misacted upon in a way that we can't even anticipate. But 5 years from now, we'll come back and smack someone in the back of the head long after I'm gone, or many years from now. Like, I find items that are filed weirdly in the portal, and it's like, I bet that happened because it was laid on the table. And so that's the message, really. It's not going to take 15 minutes unless you want to add anything, Jamie.
No, but I think you're just referring to brand new items and not necessarily.
Yeah, supplemental
Supplemental.
items are different. An S version, an A version, a memorandum attached to the item that's already on the agenda. So why don't you describe the process for getting a new version into the record?
So ultimately it does go, they email it to the agenda team. The agenda team needs a PDF version and a Word version because we stamp with our stamp the ultimate action. It needs to be emailed out to everybody. We have to have 25 copies to get it out for you guys and the public. The public doesn't get to see it if at home. And Legislative Services tried to do a web page per meeting and add the items as they came out, but I don't think it was sustainable. And then, so then the next day they're numbering and adding them to index and processing as they need to. But it's a lot of extra work. Just because it doesn't come through OnBase, and so then they have to put it through OnBase through the back door.
After the fact, without the public having the opportunity to see it, and without it going through that orderly process. Even the addendum is a bit tricky because those items aren't incorporated until the night of the meeting, and so they aren't there per se. But that's 1,000% better than the day of the meeting. The day of the meeting, really, we have to do this because something happens on Thursday or next Friday, and that something can't be delayed because it's out of our control. We really need to act. That's a justification. The budget deadline has to be approved 30 days before the month, and that's tomorrow. Okay, we have to do that. The bonds have to be properly noticed, and if we don't do it today, they will not get on the ballot, and therefore we won't have bonds this year. Okay, but because I have this flavor of the month I want to talk about at the ice cream shop is just not a reason to lay it on the table. Anna.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've struggled with the most, so this is related to late on the table, but I think where we end up in that situation is where it's not practical, or we're moving at a pace that's faster than our regular notice deadlines, because that's really what it is. If you want something on the agenda, it's got to be 2 days after our last meeting, right? And that's what goes in the regular pack. And I know that's always been, as I understand it, that's the goal, is to have as little on the addendum as possible, let alone late on the table items. But it feels like, especially the last several months, or at least, even before the new folks joined, I think the pace of the way that this body operates just accelerated so fast that I think that's partly why we're in this situation. So I think part of the goal, along with what Claire was saying, right, to just have a more chill month or 2 months, which I think is a good goal. I think it's just also thinking about kind of the pace that we've all been operating at, out of necessity. But I think that's also what generates those things, because otherwise the normal schedule, the normal structure of the way that this thing is built is that things do move kind of slow, that it's really a month to month thing, because you have to get something introduced. And so there's a month between when that gets to the clerk and gets on the agenda to when there's any possible vote on it for the most part. But just because we've had to be so responsive and reactive, and just there's a lot of things going on, that it does get in that cycle of short circuiting what was supposed to be there, even though we're procedurally allowed to do that. So I'm working on that myself, because I know deadlines are a challenge, but also just to say, I think that is part of why we are where we are right now, and where it's been complicated, because again, we're moving at a much faster pace than this body was designed to do.
I'd add just a coda to that. We're looking at the list of recognition resolutions. April and May are really congested, and that's because the calendar happens and there are all these things and everyone celebrates, but 10 per meeting is simply too much, like getting to the point of when are we going to get to our business. And so we made some pretty hard cuts on some of them recently, and then that came back and people were like, oh my God, where'd it go? And then some people who we don't hear from, we're not going to do it. But then at the last minute, they come up, oh yeah, we're here. And then it's on the agenda. So time seems to be the real currency of our government. And we have to be a little more, to my friends on the other side, conservative with our time, because there's something valuable about conserving it. Miss Meg.
Thanks. So the late on the table, I 100% agree with what's been said. But I think the pace of late on the table has also been conflated into the introduction of items at a meeting. Introduction of items at a meeting, even before we had a late on the table procedure, was always allowed. The addendum and the regular agenda were not required in order to introduce the new ordinance and set the public hearing. And in a couple of pieces of legislation I've brought that has been introduced that way, the term laid on the table is now being used as some harbinger of secrecy or keeping it from the public. And I don't think that's, one, a fair characterization. And two, it's just the practice that's existed before we had laid on the table. It just makes sense to do it with the laid on the table items because that's quite literally what happens. It is laid on the table, then introduced and set over for public hearing. So I think that's a piece of that process that should continue and needs to happen.
So Meg, I would suggest we maybe come up with a third category for our early agenda process, because I agree the charter, the code literally says a member can introduce an ordinance at any time, period. And so other than at a special meeting, which has some constraints. So, yeah. And so because of that, we should create a third distinction. One is laid on the table supplemental, one is laid on the table items that need to follow the procedure, and one is just for introduction, because we can destigmatize those items for the various public proceedings we need to do that with by just a shift in the language. Because I think there are some factions out there who have sunk their teeth into the terminology of laid on the table to use as a cudgel against change. And so I think if we created a third category on that list and just started calling them what they are, items for introduction, then because the charter allows it, then we probably can fix that. So let's think through that at the leadership table, because it's a good idea. Karen.
I just, being newer or maybe a slow reader, when I've gone through that binder on the weekend and then Monday hits and it starts bing, 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 there's all these things coming in. It's really stressful. And, you want to do a really good job of reading through that, but it is hard. And that's just what it is, I guess. But the other thing I had in my head is the resolutions. I think it's been said before, but maybe a special resolution meeting, maybe as part of our quality of life new committee.
So I think there is a value of having those at our regular meetings, some of them. We just have to figure out how to scale them properly. 3 to 4 seems reasonable. 10 is very difficult to manage and loses its magic, if you will. And so figuring out how to balance that, I think, is wise. And then, yeah, I want to speak to what you just said about Monday and how that's overwhelming. It's not just you. For me, it's Tuesday. I can manage Monday. It's Tuesday when administration starts sending down their reports. Finally, they're getting information that you've been waiting for 2 weeks, and you aren't going to have time to read it. Members of the public are sending you emails. You're getting phone calls, and it's all happening tonight. There's a point in time where it becomes impossible to absorb new information because you're preparing for the show. And so don't judge yourself for feeling that at that time, because that is natural. It is overwhelming. It is too much. And everybody wants a piece of you right then. And it's like, no. Boundaries demand. You should have brought this up a week ago, 5 days ago, Friday. Today it's too late. I have to go to my meeting and deal with the business at hand. Send me an email. And there's nothing wrong with that. That does not make you an outlier. That makes you perfectly average to the body. It's normal. So anyone else? Okay, so we'll move on to the next item. Comment period for certain boards and commissions.
So I got an email a couple of weeks ago from Mr. Whitney in the mayor's office, and he asked, where in the code is it required that, I think he asked about the Urban Design Commission for that particular email, have a public comment period. And I was in a hurry and I Googled it, or I searched it up in the code, and I said, it's right here. Well, it was in the old code and that expired in 2015. So we've been putting Planning and Zoning Commission, Plating Board, Urban Design Commission, and Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals for a 10-day public comment period as needing this 10-day public comment period, but that expired December 31st of 2015. So we probably need to stop doing that. Who does still get on there, and they're in different sections of the code. AWU Board of Directors, the Board of Adjustment got put back in 2021. And then the Solid Waste Services Commission and the Stormwater Utility Commission all require 10-day public comment periods. And then employee relation boards, this one actually needs a month because we have to give 2 weeks notice to the collective bargaining units. And then executive appointments, we set them at a regular meeting more than 10 days after received so that we can schedule a hearing work session if the chair asks.
So the reason I wanted this, that's the case. The case is that the code has changed and we've been requiring a certain comment period for boards and commissions like the Planning and Zoning Commission and some others that the code no longer requires. So rather than just make a decision where we're not going to require additional notice, I wanted to present to the body that this change has happened and we should contemplate if it is as it is and it should be as it is, we're all good. Or if there are some that should have some heightened scrutiny in their process for appointment, and by heightened scrutiny, that public comment period isn't so the public can testify on those appointments. We've never allowed the public to testify on an appointment because it's a personnel matter. It's, too much opportunity for politics, but we always have received comments by email and communications and phone calls. And so the boards that tend to receive the most interest from members of the community are the boards that deal with land use. As all of us see these conversations. And so rather than just make a decision where we're going to not do this or we're going to do this, I want to bring it up for conversation. And so we don't have to get into the merits of this today. Probably what we need to do is generate a list of all the commissions that have had that waiting period, maybe circulate it by email to all the members, and then bring it up at a future committee meeting, Rules Committee, maybe next month, to kind of make a checklist. And then what we would do is have a code drafting project to update the code to include those that there's a consensus that should continue to be having heightened scrutiny. And so I don't like to give up the scrutiny just without a contemplation of what that means. So that's the gist. Anybody want to speak to that? I don't see anyone on the list. So, okay. So more process on that. Now, this discussion of confirmation process for certain executive appointments. No, Meg and I don't always agree. Go figure. And we have a creative way of solving our differences, which is to hammer through them and figure it out. And on this one, we had a discussion, and I had been of the thought, if there is a transition coming, to help speed confirmations on certain positions, the key four. And Meg had a different perspective, and that is actually we should slow the confirmations on the key four, which would be police, fire, CFO, and I forget what the other one is, manager. And so I think I've been persuaded, but I want to let Meg, if you're prepared, Meg, just speak to this briefly as a way of framing the conversation. And it's not just now because there may be a change. It's really conversation about how we approach certain appointments and our process to achieve confirmation in a way that's thoughtful and consistent and meaningful. And so, Meg?
Sure. So yeah, I've been thinking about this and kind of reflecting back. I think that 5-year milestone makes you reflect back a little bit. And how we interface with some key confirmed positions. And actually for me, it's more than just 4. It's definitely the municipal manager, depending where you're at, but like Office of Management, Budget, CFO, Municipal Attorney's Office, Fire and Police. I would like 60 days to get to know these folks, knowing how busy we are. I would like to see them come to a couple of committee meetings. I know a lot have reached out to have coffee, but that's one thing, getting to know someone as an individual perhaps, but then I want the opportunity to work with them a little bit because I've been both surprised and disappointed across my 5 years, and really want that opportunity to find points of engagement. And with those ones I listed off in a 60-day period, something's going to come up where you'll have the opportunity to intersect with them and discuss something substantive and hopefully solve a problem together. And I think that's a really good opportunity to understand the interface between the branches of government and that particular position. And just as a reminder, I believe in code we have 90 days to effectuate confirmation. So we would definitely be within that that time period. Now, if for some reason the acting position wasn't sufficient or there was some good, compelling reason to be made by the administration, we could certainly pick a different practice. But I think as a starting point, I would just like more time with folks. Thanks.
Yeah, Ms. Cameron.
Yeah, I'm with the, not sounding like a broken record, but the only concern I have with that is the reaction to our current environment. And I think that traditionally the mayor selects these folks, right? And then the only reason that we would not approve them is if there was something that was substantial about their background or about their qualifications that would create pause for us. So I don't know. I guess I need to process that a little bit more. But I think that we're not hiring them. That the mayor is, and we're just the oversight and ensuring that all the boxes are checked and that they're meeting the requirements. So yeah, I just have to say that gives me pause. And again, I'm just thinking a lot about what we do and how that lands on future administrations. Thank you.
I can speak briefly to that as well. When this administration started, before it started, I worked really hard to secure hearings and confirmation. So within the first 10 days, they had their key team confirmed. And that was before the Cold War began. And so, and the response after was partly why it started, which I won't get into the details now, but, and so looking at my own decisions at the time, after hearing from Meg, just reflected on maybe a little more time is better. So then we can chew on the qualifications, as opposed to just speeding through for the purposes of good order. Anyhow, so, and I hear you, Mr. President Cameron, that's the kind of tension. It's like, we don't want to be too much, but we don't want to be too little in the achieving of our goals. And so that's why bringing this conversation up, we'll see what happens. Who knows? It's all an open question in the next few days. And we'll cross that bridge as we get there next month, probably, or not. And so we just wanted to lay this conversation out so folks know we're looking at it in two different ways. One is get the job done quick, and one is take our time. And we'll know much more if we have to even have that conversation in a month or in a couple weeks. So now the fun part of our meeting. Assembly member discussion on pending business and updates from committees. So Cameron, you're in the hot seat. Nothing. Okay, Mark? Nothing yet. You're learning. Karen?
I'm signed on with George for, he's working on, I'd better make sure he wants to bring it forward, but.
Yeah, to let him, if it's his baby. Anna?
Yeah, I think just the work sessions tomorrow are about a couple things that I've been working on with others. So just encourage participation in those. I'll just reiterate what I said on Tuesday for legislative committee for those who are interested or participating in that. We have one last meeting scheduled for Wednesday, June 5th, I believe, whatever the first Wednesday in June is. And the idea of that is going to be to kind of debrief what happened during session. I doubt they're going to extend, but even if they do, should be done by then. Obviously, we won't know if the governor vetoes any of our the funding that would go to our priorities, but we'll find out later. And then my intent is to have the next meeting of that committee not until September. And then we'll look at a different schedule if first Wednesday doesn't work, so that can be flexible. And again, that committee main purpose is to help develop the legislative program. And then I've also kind of used it as a space or a forum to talk about legislation, which we've done. So that wouldn't start up again until session. And then I think I just had one question for everybody else. Because I'm thinking back to our housing action plan. There's a lot of stuff on there. We can't do it all at once. But I know one thing that's been brought up over and over by the public and that I know somebody was maybe working on at some point was around tax incentives. So I know there's the state bill that may change what we can do, and that's a separate conversation. But I think there's at least some kind of incentive area that's sunsetting this year. And I know there's been time. Okay, yeah. So that I just was curious about it. I'm not doing anything with it, but that's something that seems to have we need to talk about this year.
So I'll note that the manager has joined us on the call. Go ahead, Meg.
I don't really have any new projects. I will tell you, I right now have too many committee chair assignments or co-chair assignments. And so I'll be working with the chair to possibly reduce some of those. So think about if I'm co-chairing anything and you really have an interest in it, reach out because it's just a little untenable right now, and I need to be able to spend a little bit more time with a few less things.
Gotcha. And that is definitely open conversation with, we know we're adding at least Mr. Myers to the budget and finance leadership, and others, it's time. You know your bandwidth, you know what you're interested in. Let's figure out where your leadership spots are. Everybody should take up some of that. And even Mark is joining AMATS, which is going to drown him, even as an alternate. Okay, George.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to highlight a couple of things from the Community Economic Development Committee coming up next month. We'll continue the conversation of site access testing. We had a brief conversation at our last meeting. We'll have authors of the report, site access testing report that was done there with our next meeting on June 4th. And so that should be a robust conversation. And we'll also have a presentation on land value tax, and just thinking of the continued conversation of ways to incentivize and to catalyze the new developments in our community. So it should be pretty interesting stuff. And if Member Bronco wants to mention the item that we're working on together, that's fine too. Thank you.
Karen.
So George invited me to sign on to e-bike regulations to look at the size of the motor on the e-bikes. And I've already gotten some comments on it. So the word is out, and I do think it's an important conversation.
All right, thank you. Next is Mr. Salt. Randy.
Okay, so I'm working on kind of the pallet shelter / boss cubes AO that should be coming for soon, as well as tackling the small boat launch. And then also just a brief update on what I'm gonna call Project Anchorage, a project that we're working on with members Rivera and Myers through AEDC. The project's modeled after the Oklahoma City initiative that we heard about last year through AEDC that's benefited their city over the last 30 years. So our goals are to try to help reduce property tax and fund transformational, say crowdsourced quality of life enhancing capital projects for Anchorage. I'll describe similar to Project 80s, which brought us great projects such as Lusec Library, Egan Center, Sullivan, Anchorage Museum, Alaska, the PAC, and the Coastal Trail. The initial stages, I'm happy to report, are being led by the business community because they have the staying power to get something like this done. And it's essential that we have their involvement to help get this across the finish line of public support, and are very pleased to see their engagement. We're aiming to get this on the April 2020 ballot. AEDC has engaged a professional team to help develop and support this effort, and that's Northern Compass Group and the Ship Creek Group. You should, as members, expect to hear from them soon, and feel free to reach out to them with any questions. They want to work with us to make sure that we have the right tools that we need to consider for the pending debate. General timeline is summer 2024. We'll see a public communication effort, socializing ideas to again crowdsource ideas from Anchorage residents directly, hear what kinds of projects residents think would make Anchorage a better place to live and visit. This will be supplemented with professional research from Dittman Research. And then again, the business community taking the lead on this, also soliciting ideas to help us make an informed policy decision on what this should eventually look like. And then in the fall of 2024, we'll start the collaborative process of conversations around the measure, of course, to try to build the initiative to get it onto the ballot. And we want to get this in plenty of time for us to consider, so we're not pushing it the last weeks of January. Then winter, early spring, we'll see if we make it to the ballot, ballot proposition educational campaign, starting no later than early January. So again, happy to talk more about this, and I look forward to seeing more of this come throughout the summer and the fall. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, Mr. Johnson, or yeah, Zach. You there, Mr. Johnson? Maybe we lost you. Okay, so I'll go ahead and run through my list now that I'm interested in sharing. There's a brunch hour alcohol ordinance coming forward to allow restaurants to begin service earlier in the day. Currently, the code says 10 a.m. and proposing to bring it to 8 a.m. so that brunch can serve mimosas and not bars, not package stores, just the restaurants. And so that's the theory. It's coming forward soon, probably at our next meeting. That's the plan. An ordinance to extend the 10-year Fairview Northeast downtown tax abatement is coming forward. I know there is some conversation and interest about a broader citywide tax abatement. My hope is that this one won't be held hostage to a broader effort. Then there is a request I haven't formalized yet, but I want to get a complete roster of all of the tax credits we're giving, the various tools that we've generated and that exist, so we can understand the scope of what we have done over the many years. So I'm looking into that. I haven't really started on this, but it's an animal welfare code update that is just necessary. We have not been requested to increase funding for the shelter, but I have a report that shows 1 in 10 animals that are euthanized at the shelter are euthanized because we don't have room, which means we are a kill shelter, and that is an unacceptable reality in this town. We could do better. And in fact, we've shut the shelter down a few times over the last year and a half for lack of capacity, meaning people who have animals, they find out and outside have nowhere to take them. So we have to do a better job. I'm working on that. Then there's an ordinance that you'll see in the next couple of meetings that realigns the Port Design Advisory Board, because generally speaking, the design work is getting close to being done, but we are far from a conclusion on that project. It's going to shift, if the members agree to support the ordinance, to a Port Design and Construction Advisory Board. So there will be third parties, the actual port users and some folks in the building community, to monitor the ongoing construction, to make sure we have professionals watching that can report to us so it doesn't get off track again in a substantial way. It really helped with the design So I'm hoping to bring that wisdom to the construction process, which is where things most often go wrong. The design, when it goes wrong, it just adds more money, but the construction, if it goes wrong, it could set the project back years. Then I have an ordinance that I'll hopefully see pretty soon. It looks like July. That is to tackle an issue that's pernicious. It's the resale of catalytic converters. I don't know if you followed that at all, but it's a disaster. It's $1 billion industry stealing and reselling catalytic converters from people's cars. And so one of my first ordinances was to require identification and some kind of proof for selling of wire, and also that you couldn't sell burnt wire back to the resale companies in town because people were burning wire, stealing wire and burning the insulation off in the camps, and it actually caused a firefighter to get cancer and die, one of these circumstances. So to that end, my catalytic converter project, Matthew, is probably going to expand slightly to include needing to provide identification to sell copper pipe from houses, because I have at least 3 examples of houses that were rated for their copper pipe recently, and it was resold, and the purchasers of this metal are just happy to buy it. And there needs to be a little more scrutiny on that so that we don't allow an industry, a Robin Hood industry, to exist like that. So those are the projects I have that are coming closer to fruition that you might see them in the next quarter or so. So then if there's nobody else, Zach, if you didn't come back, I'll say, is there anyone here from the public or on the phone that wants to participate? Then this is not a committee that generally gets audience participation because this is like our internal housekeeping meeting. But okay, so then if there's nobody else, any last items for the order before we come back for work sessions tomorrow? All right, then we're done for the day. We're adjourned.